their wont to act prejudiciously, and their wont to act without any regard for other people or themselves.
That night, under the blinding lights of the Bonanza set, Dan Blocker, the towering, soft-spoken man everyone saw as America's favorite good guy, suddenly turned to the camera and dropped a line that froze the entire crew in shock. If you knew how those so-called Hollywood legends really treated people of color, you'd stop calling them legends. No one saw it coming. Blocker, the gentle giant known for his big heart and clean reputation, had just exposed a truth that Hollywood had buried deep. Behind those polished smiles and glamorous lights, he'd witnessed the kind of ugliness no one dared talk about. He'd seen world-famous stars, the same ones who graced magazine covers, humiliate a black choreographer just because of his skin color. He'd read smug memos from big-name actors saying, "Never let a Negro stand on equal footing with me." And he'd stood there, sick to his stomach, watching another so-called legend treat Mexican and indigenous crew members like they didn't even exist, right there in front of everyone. Golden Age Hollywood looked like a dream on screen, but Dan Blocker had seen what really powered it. Fear, silence, and whispers dripping with hate. Those silver screen icons weren't always heroes behind the curtain. And the biggest question that still lingers is this: which of Hollywood's top 10 legends hid the darkest hearts once the cameras stopped rolling? So what could have pushed Dan Blocker, the kindest soul on Bonanza, to finally break his silence and spill everything? The reason behind his decision was deeper than anyone imagined, and it's revealed in this story. Watch till the end, because the final name on this list will absolutely shock you. Number 10, Audrey Hepburn, the silver screen angel and the hidden prejudice behind the halo. Audrey Hepburn, the world's darling, the elegant figure in the little black dress, the wide-eyed grace, that soft smile that could melt hearts everywhere. Hollywood adored her, calling her the walking angel. Fashion houses worshipped her style, and UNICEF held her up as the very symbol of compassion. But Dan Blocker once dropped a line that made jaws drop. Not every angel has white wings. Behind the glamour and that saintly glow, insiders whispered about Hepburn's quiet prejudice. During the filming of My Fair Lady, the studio wanted to bring in a brilliant black choreographer who was rising fast through pure talent. But Hepburn reportedly refused. The studio notes quoted her saying, "I'm not comfortable working with him." Just one short sentence, yet it ended a man's career because of the color of his skin. Even more disturbing were the stories Blocker later shared. Secret conversations among Hollywood elites at charity galas and fundraisers. There, Hepburn, UNICEF's very own global face, allegedly asked that photos of black children be removed from major campaigns. Why? Because according to the notes, she said their faces were not aesthetically fitting or impactful enough for the media. Those words cut deep, especially inside an organization meant to help every child, no matter their background. For Blocker, this wasn't just another rumor. It was a betrayal of everything the public believed she stood for. And what truly pushed him over the edge was something Hepburn supposedly said at a studio after party. Right when Sidney Poitier, the first black man ever to win Best Actor, made Hollywood history, Oscar, the shiny badge of talent and brains, came up, and then a line dropped like a brick. He's too black to play a romantic lead. Short words, brutal weight, a hit that slammed a whole generation of actors of color trying to climb in a white-centered Hollywood. The gap between the fairy tale image of Audrey and these alleged quiet biases burned into Blocker's mind, and it never left. He told a colleague straight up, "I don't hate Audrey. I hate how we glorify an icon without daring to look at its shadow." Hepburn didn't yell slurs on set or blast out memos banning black folks. She wasn't loud like that. But according to insiders and Blocker's account, it was the silence, the polite shutouts, the refined no that made the bias feel slick and hard to catch. And to Blocker, sugar-coated discrimination was still discrimination, maybe worse because people refused to believe it exists. Then came a harsher twist, a bigger paradox that rattled Blocker even more. A man the world praised as a bold progressive, yet whose private notes allegedly made Blocker snap, he fought for justice only when the cameras were rolling. Number 9, Marlon Brando, the part-time activist. Brando forever. Don Corleone, the rebel artist, the headline civil rights champion, got treated like the banner of progressive Hollywood, the guy magazines loved to hail. When he sent Sachin Little Feather to take his Oscar as a protest against Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans, people cheered like a saint had just walked the carpet. But Blocker, who crossed paths with Brando at multiple backstage functions, said the vibe shifted off camera. He called him an activist only when there's an audience, a performer who turned the justice switch on when the spotlight hit, then cooled it when the room went quiet. The truth behind Marlon Brando's image was nowhere near as glamorous as the speeches he gave under bright lights. In his private diary, pages never meant for public eyes, Brando allegedly wrote that Martin Luther King Jr. was a product of the media, as if the civil rights movement wasn't a fight for survival, but just another publicity stunt. That one line alone cracked the perfect picture Hollywood had painted of him. Dan Blocker later claimed he heard Brando say the same thing at a private closed-door party. When someone mentioned MLK's name, Brando allegedly shrugged and said, "He's no different from an image crafted for television." That icy statement hit Blocker hard, and it only got darker from there. Because what came next shattered Blocker's faith completely. While the world worshipped Brando as a fearless voice for equality, financial records told another story. One that no one in the industry ever wanted to see. Behind the scenes, he was quietly funneling money into a group that openly opposed interracial marriage. This same organization spread fear about people of color under the twisted slogan of protecting cultural purity. No one outside the inner circle knew. No one imagined that the man shouting for justice on camera was secretly funding the very injustice he condemned. But the final straw for Blocker came one glittering awards night, hidden from the audience's eyes. Internal notes from crew members revealed that Brando refused to hand an award to a black artist, claiming it was inappropriate for the ceremony. Blocker remembered hearing him say loud enough for others to catch it, "It's fine if a black person wins, but standing next to me on stage, not yet." The whole tech crew went silent, frozen by what they'd just heard. To the world, Brando was the hero who stood up to Hollywood's hypocrisy. But to Dan Blocker, he was just another performer, a man who played the role of the good guy better than anyone else ever could. If Marlon Brando was a half-baked hero, the next man on Dan Blocker's list wasn't pretending to be anything close to one. This guy didn't fake kindness, didn't put on a progressive mask. He truly believed he belonged to a superior race. Number 8, John Wayne, the cowboy face of white supremacy in Hollywood. In the grand story of Hollywood, few names stood taller than John Wayne. He was America's cowboy, the picture of old-school masculinity, the flag-waving symbol of patriotism generations grew up idolizing. But for Dan Blocker, Wayne wasn't a hero at all. He was the clearest example of what Blocker called white supremacy in a cowboy hat. Unlike Audrey Hepburn with her soft-spoken bias or Brando with his on-and-off activism, Wayne didn't bother to hide his beliefs. No filters, no charm, no apologies. In an interview that Hollywood later tried to bury deep, Wayne flat out said, "I believe in white supremacy." No metaphors, no fancy phrasing, just a raw declaration that he thought white people should stay on top of everyone else. The moment those words hit print, it became clear this wasn't just an outdated opinion. It was a mindset that shaped how he saw the world. Blocker recalled that Wayne didn't just talk that way. He lived it, and he brought it straight onto the set and into his roles. When the civil rights movement caught fire, some stars stayed quiet out of fear, but not Wayne. He called those who marched for equality communist agitators, and proudly aligned himself with politicians dead set against integration. And it wasn't all talk either. According to Blocker's accounts, things once got physical. Wayne allegedly attacked black journalist James Hicks after being asked about his opposition to the Civil Rights Act. The same man millions saw as the ultimate hero of the Wild West had, behind the scenes, become one of the most unapologetic symbols of racial arrogance Hollywood ever produced. It wasn't just a heated argument. It was a real attack. 2 witnesses later confirmed it, but what truly haunted Dan Blocker went far beyond that single violent moment. What chilled him most was how John Wayne used his influence to quietly rewrite history itself. During the production of The Alamo in 1960, Wayne allegedly gave a direct order to the writing team: erase the contributions of Mexican fighters. He called their inclusion colored propaganda. Just one note from him was enough to force the entire crew to change the script, reshaping a national story into something that fit his worldview. White men as the only heroes, everyone else erased from the spotlight. But it didn't stop there. Wayne's control reached far beyond the movie screen. Inside his own company, Batjack Productions, he reportedly enforced a whites-only hiring rule for years. Any application from a black, Mexican, or Native American candidate instantly rejected, no matter how skilled or qualified. The only thing that mattered was skin color, not talent, not experience, nothing else. To the audience, John Wayne stood as the immortal cowboy, the symbol of American strength and pride. But to Dan Blocker, he represented something far darker. Living proof that Hollywood didn't just entertain the nation, it shaped the nation's beliefs. Wayne, with his fame and his films, didn't just tell stories. He molded ideology, turning prejudice into patriotism. And if Wayne was the man shouting supremacy from the biggest stage, the next name on Blocker's list shocked everyone even more. A seemingly delicate, graceful icon with bright red lipstick who hid a machinery of quiet cruelty beneath her charm. Victims still shudder at the memory of what she said and did behind the scenes. Number 7, Judy Garland. Beneath the red lipstick, a hidden machinery of contempt. To the world, Judy Garland was the fragile girl with the trembling smile and the sad, glistening eyes from The Wizard of Oz. Her voice could melt hearts. Her presence made audiences weep. Hollywood crowned her the most delicate soul of the Golden Age. But according to Dan Blocker, there was another Judy, one no article, no legend, no piece of film ever wanted to reveal. Blocker once said, "There are people who are cruel with a punch. Garland did it with a shrug and a contemptuous glance." He claimed she carried a quiet but cutting kind of cruelty, one that hid behind her velvet smile. On the set of The Harvey Girls, Garland reportedly demanded that a black dancer be fired on the spot, all because his hand had accidentally brushed the fringe of her costume. No insult, no sabotage, just a harmless touch. Yet Garland acted like it was a crime. MGM's own disciplinary files, according to insiders, recorded the whole event, and several staff members later told Blocker she reacted as though she'd been personally violated. But what truly broke Blocker's patience happened years later, at one of Garland's major live shows in the early 1960s. Just before curtain call, the show's director quietly mentioned that several black audience members were seated in the front row, guests who had paid for the highest priced tickets. Garland reportedly exploded, shouting for staff to move them down. Her voice, once the comfort of millions, filled the backstage area with fury as she allegedly screamed, "I'm not singing in front of those monkeys!" The room froze in disbelief. Crew members stood stunned, unable to process that such hateful words had come from the same voice that once sang "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." To America, she was the fragile songbird of the screen. But to Dan Blocker, she was proof that Hollywood's sweetest faces could hide the coldest hearts. Even more shocking, Judy Garland's outrageous demand was actually obeyed. The black audience members she refused to sing in front of were quietly invited to switch seats, all to avoid upsetting the star. The show went on, but the damage was done. And then there was Sammy Davis Jr., her colleague, co-performer, and one of the most celebrated black entertainers of that era. At a private Hollywood party, when Davis walked over to greet her, Garland reportedly dropped a racial slur that froze the entire room. It wasn't drunken babble or a careless slip. According to Blocker, it was said in the cold, confident tone of someone who knew her power and believed she could say anything without consequence. The cruelest twist. Garland's public image had always been built on empathy. The sorrowful star, the broken heart everyone pitied, the gentle voice that made millions cry. But behind the scenes, Blocker said he learned a hard truth. Nothing is crueler than someone who plays the victim beautifully, but turns others into targets. Garland didn't have to wave supremacist flags or draft hateful rules. Her fame alone carried enough weight to make others obey. no matter how unfair the order. To Dan Blocker, Judy Garland became the perfect symbol of Hollywood's double face, how sweetness could mask venom and how charm could silence truth. But the next figure on his list revealed something even more dangerous and the kind of person who hides prejudice behind progressiveness. The ones who speak the language of freedom, all while quietly reinforcing the same old power structures beneath their polished smiles. Number 6, Paul Newman, a liberal exterior, a quietly discriminatory mind. Paul Newman, those famous blue eyes, that easy grin that seemed to melt the air itself. The world adored him, the handsome hero who radiated kindness. He raised millions for charity, championed the poor, and even built a food empire that donated 100% of its profits. To the public, he was the golden standard of Hollywood compassion. But according to Dan Blocker, there was a colder truth hiding beneath that soft-spoken charm. No one ever expected Paul Newman's name to appear on Dan Blocker's list. The world saw him as the face of decency, the Hollywood saint with a conscience, but Blocker once sighed and said something that stuck with everyone who heard it. There's no racism more painful than the kind that's disguised as kindness. And to him, Newman was the perfect example of that hidden cruelty. In the world of auto racing, where Newman owned a team and invested millions, he was celebrated as the man who brought elegance and sportsmanship to Hollywood's rougher corners. But behind that polished image, Blocker discovered a truth that hit hard. Team documents revealed Newman had quietly enforced a ban on black drivers, and that policy stayed in place until 1969, years after the civil rights movement had shaken the country to its core. There wasn't a lack of talent or qualified drivers. Newman simply believed they didn't fit the team's image. Then came the part that truly broke Blocker's admiration. Newman's private journal entries. In those pages, he allegedly described Jim Brown, the era's legendary black football player and rising actor, using words dripping with prejudice. Rough, dangerous, doesn't belong in my Hollywood. That was the Newman no one ever saw, the one who only came out when the lights went off and the cameras stopped rolling. But what infuriated Blocker most wasn't just what Newman thought, it was what he did. He took those beliefs into the real world. Blocker discovered letters Newman had written during the early 1960s, actively campaigning against school integration in Connecticut. In his words, mixing black and white children in classrooms could cause social instability. That reasoning, almost identical to the rhetoric pushed by hardline segregationists, crushed the illusion of the charming humanitarian millions had adored. To audiences, Paul Newman was the man with the kind eyes and generous soul. But to Dan Blocker, he was the proof that even Hollywood's brightest smiles could hide the darkest shadows. Dan Blocker once admitted he truly believed Paul Newman wanted to make Hollywood a fairer place, until he saw how Newman quietly divided people by the color of their skin. That's when Blocker realized something brutal. There are people who shout about freedom, not because they believe in equality, but because they don't want to be called conservative. Newman stayed handsome, polished, and endlessly praised. The charity king, the man of the people, the blue-eyed poster boy for goodness. But to Blocker, that perfect image made him more dangerous, not less. Because when someone looks that pure, nobody dares imagine the shadows hiding behind their charm. And the next name on Blocker's list proved that hypocrisy wasn't rare in Hollywood. It was practically a costume. This was a man whose so-called progressiveness was nothing but a glossy coat of paint covering a wall already rotting from the inside. Number 5, Frank Sinatra, the progressive image that was only a coat of paint. Frank Sinatra. Old Blue Eyes himself, the crooner whose smooth voice could hush an entire room, the definition of timeless style and swagger. Hollywood adored him as the cool rebel with a conscience, the man who sang about love, freedom, and fairness. He posed proudly with black artists, shared stages with them, and was praised for being ahead of his time, a star who stood against racism when others stayed silent. But Dan Blocker, who attended several of Sinatra's exclusive backstage parties, claimed there was another story behind the glamour. He once said something that left everyone around him speechless. Sinatra was great at standing next to black people, and as long as the cameras were on. Because once those lights dimmed and the crowds were gone, The real Sinatra allegedly emerged, one far colder than the crooner on stage. Hidden in the old Sands Hotel records, where Sinatra performed night after night, lay details that painted a very different picture, one that Dan Blocker said the world was never meant to see. Hidden deep in the paperwork of the Sands Hotel was a clause almost no one noticed, one that said it all. Black singers were forbidden from headlining the main room. On the busiest nights, they could open, they could warm up the crowd, but they would never take the spotlight Sinatra claimed as his own. The excuse written in the records was chillingly simple, not suitable for the hotel's image. It was luxury racism, the kind that didn't need shouting or violence, just a quiet line in a contract that kept everyone in their place. But the truth behind the paper cuts even deeper. Blocker recalled a story whispered among photographers of that time, a story that made his stomach turn. Sinatra once allegedly attacked a black photographer, beating him and shouting slurs in public just because the man snapped him from an angle he didn't like. It wasn't about professionalism or reputation. It was pure ego and prejudice. The world adored Sinatra for singing Fly Me to the Moon, but Blocker said he'd heard of another Sinatra entirely, one who spat slurs instead of lyrics when the cameras stopped flashing. And the problem wasn't just him, it was the system he helped uphold. Sinatra, with all his fame and influence, supported a network of racially segregated nightclubs stretching from Las Vegas to Miami. Under the excuse of preserving luxury, he encouraged club owners to separate black and white patrons, keep black headliners off the VIP lists, and enforce the silent rule that they could perform for the crowd, but never sit among it. To the public, Sinatra was the silky voice of equality, the artist who sang about love and justice. But to Dan Blocker, he was something else entirely, a brutal reminder that some people don't sing about freedom to share it. They sing about it to own it. The problem wasn't Sinatra's voice. It was the power behind it and the selective way he chose who deserved to hear his song. Sinatra used his influence like a weapon, progressive on stage, discriminatory behind the curtain. But after him, Dan Blocker's focus shifted to another Hollywood titan, a man whose icy charm and effortless swagger masked something much darker. Number 4, Steve McQueen, the king of cool, but not cool with black people. Steve McQueen, the untouchable icon of rebellion, that cigarette dangling from his lips, that smirk that could silence a room, that slow-burning confidence that made him the face of Hollywood's free spirit. To fans, he was freedom itself, the man who played by his own rules. But according to Dan Blocker, that freedom had boundaries, skin-deep ones. Blocker once said something that flipped McQueen's legacy upside down. McQueen was cool, unless your skin wasn't white. Behind the cameras of The Great Escape, one of McQueen's most legendary films, that ugly truth reportedly surfaced. When the studio suggested diversifying the cast to more accurately reflect the real multicultural makeup of World War II soldiers, McQueen flat out refused. He pressured the director, argued with the writers, and even threatened to walk away from the entire film if any black actors were added. He framed it as a matter of historical authenticity, but to Blocker it was nothing more than racism wearing a researcher's badge. And that wasn't even the worst of it. The real chill came from what lay beneath the surface, something hidden for years until classified documents told the rest of the story. According to later released FBI files, Steve McQueen allegedly cooperated secretly with the agency, feeding information about civil rights activists within the entertainment industry. He wasn't just acting in war films, he was helping monitor the very people fighting real battles for equality. To the public, McQueen was the king of cool, the man everyone wanted to be. But to Dan Blocker, he was proof that Hollywood's rebellion was often an illusion because even the coolest man alive could be ice cold where it mattered most. He handed over names, meeting spots, even personal details, all under the banner of protecting Hollywood from communism, according to accounts Blocker heard and repeated. But to Dan Blocker, the real deal was simpler. McQueen feared the change the rights movement was bringing, and he didn't just fear it. He pushed back hard. In the 1960s, while Congress debated the Civil Rights Act, a move to end legal segregation, McQueen allegedly stood with the opposition, loud and clear. No hedging, no coded talk. He claimed giving black Americans equal access to basic rights was excessive government intrusion. And that line stuck with Blocker like a bruise. It led him to say, if being cool means standing still while others are crushed, then McQueen truly was the king of cool. The words hit like ice. Smooth image, cold choices. Here's the twist. McQueen was crowned the icon of rebellion and personal freedom, the driver who went fast, broke rules faster, and became a legend even faster. But Blocker kept repeating a truth folks didn't want to face. Not every rebel fights for justice. Some just rebel to keep their spot on top of a white pyramid. That's not edge. That's comfort dressed up as cool. And Blocker wasn't buying it. And if McQueen taught Blocker that prejudice can wear a leather jacket and a smirk, the next name showed him something even heavier. The kind of star who treats racism like it's just the way the world works. Number 3, Charlton Heston. The epic screen hero with prejudice carved into the base. The crowned figure of Ben-Hur, the man who parted the sea in the 10 Commandments. And a legacy that made Blocker look twice behind the spotlight. Charlton Heston, the towering, godlike figure of Hollywood epics. The man who stood tall in Ben-Hur, who parted the sea in the 10 Commandments, who looked every bit the face of righteousness on screen. But to Dan Blocker, that image was nothing more than a mask, because behind the hero's glow stood one of Hollywood's most polished examples of two-faced hypocrisy. One face for saving the world in movies, and another for quietly protecting racial hierarchies when the cameras stopped rolling. Inside the studio system, Heston was notorious for using his clout to shrink or erase black roles, no matter what the script demanded. Screenwriters who worked with him said it was a pattern. Whenever a black character began standing out too much, Heston would push for adjustments to balance the story. Everyone in the room knew exactly what that really meant. One director later revealed a note that froze Blocker in place. It read, "The audience doesn't want to see a Negro on equal footing with me." It wasn't from the studio. It came directly from Heston himself. Short, cold, and sharp enough to slice the future out of any black actor hoping to share equal billing with him. But Heston's prejudice didn't stop at the studio gates. He took it into the real world, bold and unapologetic. During the 1960s, when America was burning with the fight for civil rights, Heston poured money into the campaign of George Wallace, the very man who shouted, "Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever." That endorsement said everything. Later, as president of the NRA, Heston used that platform to feed fear, giving fiery speeches that painted pictures of urban chaos and black violence. Crowds roared, politicians nodded, and the myth of the heroic everyman grew stronger. But to Dan Blocker, it was crystal clear. Beneath the divine image and booming voice was a man who didn't want equality, just control dressed up as courage. He was the man who once swung swords and saved nations on screen. But now, that same heroic authority was being used to defend discrimination in real life. To Hollywood, Charlton Heston was the very image of moral strength and justice, the ultimate savior figure. But to Dan Blocker, he was living proof that playing Moses doesn't teach a man about equality. Some men only understand power and refuse to share it with anyone whose skin isn't like theirs. And the next name on Blocker's list showed another flavor of the same sickness. Prejudice that whispered instead of shouted, polished in a tuxedo and hidden behind a gentleman's smile. Number 2, Fred Astaire, elegant on stage, pushing black performers out of the spotlight. Fred Astaire, the name that still makes people think of elegance, rhythm, and effortless charm. Every step he took seemed to defy gravity. Every tuxedo he wore looked like it was stitched by the heavens. He was grace itself, perfection in motion. But to Dan Blocker, Astaire represented something much darker, a man who proved that racism doesn't always come with rage or insults. Sometimes it wears a bow tie and smiles politely as it shuts the door. In 1936's Swing Time, Astaire performed what was advertised as a tribute to black tap legend Bill Bojangles Robinson. But the way he paid that tribute, by painting his face black, exaggerating features, and performing in full blackface for a white audience, the number was framed as an homage, yet it erased the very man it claimed to honor, Astaire soaking up applause for a performance that reduced a real black artist to a caricature. And that wasn't just a one-time mistake. Blocker learned that Astaire had a long-running pattern of quietly enforcing separation on his sets. He repeatedly requested all-white casts, rejected scenes he thought were too integrated, and made it clear he didn't want to share the frame with black performers in any way that might suggest equality. To the world, Fred Astaire floated through Hollywood like an angel in tails. But to Dan Blocker, he was proof that even the lightest dancer could cast a long, dark shadow. No public memos, no fiery speeches, just polite requests, backstage preferences, and subtle nods everyone on the crew understood without a word, according to insiders Dan Blocker spoke with. He said he saw a star's silent bias baked into the choices, films about jazz with barely any black musicians, dance routines lifted from black styles, but never with black dancers beside him, borrowed culture, excluded people. Hollywood history calls Fred Astaire the definition of refinement, but Blocker said that Polish hid something not refined at all. A spotlight he wanted aimed only at faces that matched his own. No tantrums, no tirades, just tidy adjustments and quiet cuts that kept the frame clean, while the message stayed loud to the folks who got pushed out. If Astaire used elegance to draw invisible lines, Blocker said the final name on his list showed something even harder to swallow. Warmth on stage masking ice off it. Number 1, Bing Crosby. A warm voice, a cold prejudice. That's how Blocker heard it described by people close to the scene. Bing Crosby, the sound of white Christmas, the silky voice that made winter feel gentle. His image was so spotless that whole generations believed he embodied kindness and calm. But Blocker pointed to a very different Crosby whispered about off stage. Not singing, not smiling, and not soft at all. The story, Blocker said, starts with his son Gary Crosby's memoir, which alleged a colder reality at home. Gary wrote that his father regularly used slurs for black people and Latinos, claims that clashed violently with the public's dreamy picture of the crooner. To Blocker, that gap between the soothing song and the frosty behavior wasn't just irony. It was the blueprint for how a warm image can cover a heart that runs cold. Gary Crosby's memoir didn't just hint. It stated plainly that his father used slurs for black people, Latinos, and Jews with complete ease, as if they were everyday phrases, not bursts of anger or relics from a harsher past. He said them, Gary wrote, the way someone comments on the weather. To Dan Blocker, that was even more chilling than those who screamed their hatred out loud, because that kind of quiet racism didn't need shouting. It came from a cold comfort, a calm certainty that needed no excuse or justification, and it didn't stop at words. Backstage accounts revealed that Bing Crosby was an active member of several elite clubs that openly excluded people of color. These places operated under unwritten but powerful rules. White members strolled proudly through the front door, while anyone else, if allowed at all, was sent around to the back. Crosby never challenged those rules, not once. He went along with them, endorsed them by silence, and soaked up the comfort they gave him. What left Dan Blocker bitter wasn't just that Crosby carried prejudice. It was how perfectly he hid it. His charm, his calm voice, his songs about peace and love built a public image so convincing that the world accepted it without question. His records spun through the happiest family moments, Christmas mornings, snowy nights, and cozy living rooms, while behind the curtain he quietly upheld the very system that divided those families outside his songs. To Dan Blocker, that was the cruelest contrast of all. A man whose voice warmed the world, yet whose silence helped keep it cold. People forget, Dan Blocker once said. Crosby's music soothed America's heart, but he made many hearts feel heavier. Those words cut deep because they summed up everything Blocker had uncovered about the stars the world once worshipped. An artist can make the world feel warm, he said, but that doesn't mean they're warm toward the world itself. When Blocker first exposed these hidden truths, Hollywood didn't erupt in outrage. It went silent, not because no one believed him, but because everyone already knew. The glittering world of the Golden Age had always been built on invisible lines quietly between races, hidden behind perfect smiles and spotless reputations. That age of glory wasn't just made of bright lights and red carpets. It was held together by silence, fear, and the kind of discrimination that smiled right to your face. From the graceful Audrey Hepburn to the progressive Marlon Brando, from the all-American John Wayne to the angelic Judy Garland, the kind Paul Newman, the cool Steve McQueen, the heroic Charlton Heston, the elegant Fred Astaire, and even the warm Bing Crosby. Every single one of them carried a darkness the audience never saw. Every polished tuxedo, every heartfelt speech, every movie about justice, it all made the truth sting harder. Behind the legends were prejudices that helped shape a Hollywood blindingly white in its casting, its opportunities, and even its history. So now it's your turn. Which of these names shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep following this series.